Hello everybody and welcome back to a new video. My name is Sarah and today I'm going to be doing oddly specific book recommendations. However, normally these types of videos are made by YouTubers who ask their followers or subscribers on Instagram or Twitter or whatever for oddly specific book recommendation prompts that they're looking for, and then they take a bunch of those and make a book recommendation video out of it. However, my channel and my Instagram and everything are very, very small, so I don't really have a lot of people to ask that question to who would answer. So all of these prompts I just came up with myself because I wanted to, because I realized there's a lot of books that I haven't talked about on this channel for what feels like quite a while, but that I wanted to bring back and recommend and talk about, and I also just haven't done a recommendation video in a while, and those are my favorite types of videos. I couldn't come up with a unifying theme for a recommendation video. Usually I like to do a themed video, books to get you out of reading slump, books to read during the autumn season, or books for new readers or things like that, and I just couldn't come up with something like that, so I just decided we're doing oddly specific book recommendations that literally nobody asked for because I came up with them by myself. So I have 13 book recommendations. Some of them start out kind of a little more general, and then others get more very, very specific. So the first book recommendation that I have is for dystopian novels, because back in the heyday of YA dystopia, I was thriving, and YA books have geared kind of away from the dystopian genre or trope theme, whatever you want to call it, but there are a couple that I do want to recommend. The first one being The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. It's not necessarily a fantasy dystopia. This is more like a Handmaid's Tale-esque dystopia, where we are in this town where they send away their girls once they turn 16 for an entire year to go live out in the wilderness in this enclosed camp area all by themselves, in order to dispel this supposed magic that's inside of them, in order for them to, once they come back the next year, to then be married off, or if they don't get married off right when they come back, they end up being spinsters for forever and working in fields or something like that. And I just really like this book because it has that very nostalgic dystopian vibe. It deals a lot with feminist discussions, particularly how women can be harmful towards each other, which I found really interesting, and I just think it's a very interesting thought experiment in this novel. So then the other dystopian novel that I have is more kind of the typical fantasy dystopia that you saw in the YA dystopia heyday, and that is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. If you've been around my channel for any length of time, you'll know that Samantha Shannon is my favorite author. This is set to be a 7-book series. There's currently 4 out right now, and this is the first book in the series. So in this series, we're kind of in this not so far off future, but kind of in a version of our world where clairvoyants have always existed, but being clairvoyant is illegal, and our main character, Paige Mahoney, is a very rare type of clairvoyant, and one day she gets found out and arrested, and upon being arrested and taken off to the prison, she then discovers that there is a very underground like whole system behind this society, and it just like spirals out and explodes both her perception of the world and just the world of the story in general, and it feels very much like Divergent, The Maze Runner, The Hunger Games, that kind of a thing where you're looking at kind of the structures of society and kind of the uglier parts are in this case hidden away. But yeah, I just absolutely love this. And if you're looking for like a kick-ass dystopian main female protagonist, Paige is one of the best. So the next recommendation that I have is for a dark academia book that I don't hear anybody ever really talking about. You know, people really love the dark academia genre. However, one that has come out recently, I think last year, but nobody ever really talks about, is A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This is the Owl Crate edition, and basically in this novel, obviously we are in kind of this elite boarding school, this all-girls school. There have been murders that happened in the past. There's a death that happened in the not so distant past, lots of secrets that are being untangled, lots of very close quarters relationships, very, very atmospheric. I absolutely loved like the dark academia atmosphere that this is utterly steeped in. I think it's just pulled off really well, and it gives you that vibe that you want, and I'm just surprised because of that, because it's so atmospheric. I'm surprised that more people don't pick this up and check it out or talk about it. I just think it's a really fun one, and I was vibing with it the whole time I was reading it. The next recommendation I have is for a slow burn horror with very, very messy characters, and I recommend Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. This is a really, really fun novel. It's pretty large, which makes sense for being like a slow burn horror. It's also multimedia. You know, we've got like our normal prose, but then we have like transcripts, and then there's even some illustrations in this book. But this has like kind of an academia feel. I don't classify this as dark academia, but it's set at a boarding school, another all-girls boarding school. We're actually following two different timelines. Back in kind of the turn of the century, early 1900s, there was a series of deaths that occurred on the school campus in very mysterious ways, and then shortly after the school closed down. So we're following kind of that timeline and what happened to those girls leading up to the school closure, and then we're also following present day, where we have two actresses and then an author who are going onto the campus in order to film kind of a documentary film of what happened to close the school, and how like the two timelines kind of start converging in each other. It is very atmospheric, very creepy, and I love the slow build up to create the horror. I also just really enjoyed these characters. They, like I said, they are very, very messy. They're very multifaceted. Oftentimes they like in equal parts like hate each other or are jealous, but then like love each other, and it's just a very complicated, messy set of relationships. But it's just a really, really fun read that I wanted to talk about again. So then next I wanted to recommend a short science fiction novel that tackles classism, and that is The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. This, I think I saw it like briefly be talked about on BookTube, but it didn't take off nearly as much as I thought it was going to. But yeah, this is a very short novel, but very like well developed. The world felt very expansive while also like the story feeling very self-contained. I was really impressed, and I thought it was done really well. But we're basically in this futuristic world where we're on Earth and we can actually like travel across multiverses and send people to different versions of the Earth. However, you can only be sent to that version if your doppelganger that like lives in that version of the world is already dead. So we're following our main character who, out of like the 400 possible versions of Earth, or 400-ish possible versions of Earth that we're able to like travel to, over 372 of her like versions of herself are dead. And so now she's hired to go like visit those 370 some odd versions to kind of collect data on like what that version of Earth has done, and how whatever they've done has impacted kind of climate, socioeconomic, political standings, things like that. And however, when she goes to visit like her most recent job, to go visit a different version of Earth, she witnesses one of her doppelgangers dying. That doppelganger was supposed to already be dead. And so this kind of ends up turning into a murder mystery. Obviously it's science fiction. We tackle a lot about classism though, and kind of like what being born into a certain class ends up setting you up in terms of like a lifestyle and chance of like survival and things like that. And it's very, very well written, well thought out science fiction perspective of something that definitely needs to be considered in our own world. But yeah, I've been really impressed with this book, and I think more people should pick it up. So my next recommendation is for Forrest Gump, but make it magical realism. And that is Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstances by Ruth M. Lane. This is such a like warm and fuzzy kind of lighthearted book. So in this book we're learning about this orphan boy, Waylon Gray, who was raised by wolves, quite literally, but we are following his life story as it's told through the perspective of other people who have had their lives largely impacted by Waylon himself. But like, so it feels like kind of like in the movie of Forrest Gump, with Forrest sitting on this bench and telling people his life story. But in this sense, it's told from other people's perspectives. But like, you get the same sense of like in Forrest Gump, where you realize Forrest has like led this very fascinating, adventurous life with like just lots of different stories and how he's made a big impact on a lot of people's lives. Waylon is the same, and they kind of go about life in the same way, where they don't really realize like how big of an impact they're having on other people necessarily. They're just kind of living their life. But in this case, Waylon has these like weird magical realism things that occur around him. And so it's a very whimsical take on kind of the Forrest Gump type of story, and I just really like this one. So then next I have a recommendation for a book that screams A24 horror film. In this case, this book was actually made into a film already. However, it was not done by A24, and that is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. Now, I have not seen the Netflix film of this, but I have been told that like people who have read the book and seen the film were very, very disappointed by the adaptation, the film adaptation. And so I truly think A24 would have really done this well, because A24 just does those weird psychological horrors so well. And this is a weird psychological horror. This book had me like staring at the wall blankly, just like wondering what the heck I was listening to, because I listened to this on audiobook, which I highly recommend, because I think the audiobook, the production does a specific thing that happens in the book so well that it like almost adds to the experience. To be honest, I'm not sure if I was reading just the book itself, if it would have had the same level of impact on me compared to what it did when I was listening to it. And I know I feel like that's very vague, but I do highly recommend the audiobook of this. I will say this is a very short book, but it starts out incredibly slow. If you make it past that slow beginning, you will be rewarded with kind of the horrific, like, turning point that it takes. I didn't even talk about what it's about, but in this book we're basically following this young woman, our narrator, who goes unnamed, but she is driving through kind of a snowstorm with her boyfriend to go visit her boyfriend's parents and meet them for the first time, but all the while she is thinking of ending the relationship. And that's all I'm gonna tell you, because if I say anything more, it's a spoiler for this book because it is so short. But yeah, highly recommend checking it out, and especially recommend the audiobook for it. Okay, so my 7th recommendation that I have for you is just Greek myth Hunger Games. And I am gonna say Lore by Alexander Bakken is a Greek myth Hunger Games, kind of, basically, kind of. So we're basically in, like, our world, but there's a bunch of these, like, secret society families that all are descended from our ancient Greek heroes, and every 7 years there's this competition that takes place for 7 days where the Greek gods come down to earth and they are made mortal, and the Greek families kind of compete to kill off these Greek gods, and whoever kills the Greek god then becomes the god themselves, so they, like, take on the god's powers, and they are then that new god. It's very fast-paced. It is an incredibly fast-paced story, and it feels like if the Hunger Games had the Greek gods and took place in New York City. I think that's the best way to sell it, to be honest with you. But I had a lot of fun with this book. This is another one. This is another one that I'm, like, really surprised more people haven't, like, picked up and talked about, because I really do think it's a fun YA novel. So I did lie, and I said that I came up with all of these. However, Connor, my husband, did come up with one of them. He came up with number 8, and he wanted a book that reminded me of the Bloodborne video game. Now, I have never played Bloodborne myself, but I have watched Connor play quite a bit of it, and from my understanding of the game, the best recommendation that I have is more of a Western take on kind of Bloodborne game, and that is Six Gun Tarot. This is the first book in a series, actually, and I buddy read this with my brother. It's categorized as Weird Wild West, where, like, these weird supernatural things start happening in this Wild West town. And I just had a lot of fun with this book because you have this, like, small Wild West town, but each, like, kind of person in this town has some really obscure, weird, supernatural secret that they are, like, keeping hidden from the rest of the town, which it's just funny to, like, read from these characters' different perspectives and realize that, like, they all have some sort of weird supernatural thing, but they're afraid to let everybody else know because they're like, well, nobody would believe me or whatever. But then, like, this weird zombie plague starts happening in this town, and so our characters have to figure out how to solve it, and to me that just kind of reminded me of the Bloodborne game, so yeah, that's my recommendation for that. I highly recommend checking it out. I do want to continue the series, hopefully soon. I do have the rest of the series on my Kindle. There was, like, a cheap bundle for the rest of the series that came up, like a bundle deal, so I picked up the rest of them when I realized that I was enjoying the first one. So number 9 is a book with feminist rage meets Transformers, and for that I want to recommend Iron Widow by Xiranjie Zhao. This is the first book in a duology. The second book I think is coming out next year, but this book floored me. If you just want just a sci-fi book with like pure like feminine rage that you can like feel and almost like you feel like you can reach out and like touch it, that's this book, Iron Widow. And then you add in like giant mecha battles into this, and it's just so insane and so much fun. So the author actually also describes this book as the anime Darling in the Franxx meets ancient China. So in this book, we're set in a world where there are kind of these giant mechanical beasts that wreak havoc on the world, and so in order to combat them, the government has set up these like giant mecha battle suits, and each suit requires a girl and a boy to pilot them. However, the boy is the pilot and the girl is like this battery source. And in this world, if you're born a girl, you basically get two options in your life. You're either married off to like a rich family to then bring money into your family, or you are sent off to basically be a battery pack for one of the guys that pilots these mecha suits. So our main character's older sister was sent off to work with the mecha suits. However, she didn't die in battle. She died like before going into battle. And she's convinced that the pilot that she was paired up with had murdered her. And so she has decided that she's going to sell herself off into being part of the military and become this pilot's next partner in order to get revenge for her sister. And that's how it starts. It ends up cascading into a way bigger plot line, but it is super fun in terms of like just the creativeness of these mecha battles and everything, but it definitely deals a lot with like feminine rage, and I think it's portrayed really well. So number 10 is unhinged characters that tackle colonialism, colorism, classism, and the brutalities of war. And that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is the first book in the Poppy War trilogy. This is the gorgeous Illumicrate edition. And this is one of my favorite series. So in this book, you're following a war orphan named Rin, and she is living with this family who is trying to sell her off as a bride, but she is refusing to be married off. And so she ends up taking this test to join this elite military academy, ends up passing the test and entering this military academy that is meant only for like these super rich families to send their children to. While there, she ends up realizing that these like shamanic abilities that are kind of like thought to be a myth are actually real, and she has the potential to use them. And this story then just like explodes out into like discussions of war and colonialism. There's a lot of classism and colorism, and it's just an extremely no punches pulled type of depiction of war and all of these tragic events that come with war, and it's beautiful. It is heart-wrenching. It is like horrifying. I just think Kuang is like an amazing author, and I loved Rin as a character. I loved kind of our supporting characters as well, especially Katai. Oh my goodness, I love Katai. He's the best. But yeah, this trilogy is just amazing. So for number 11, I have a book that is simultaneously trying to be edgy but also highbrow at the same time. And for that, I have Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is the first book in the Nevernight trilogy. Now, you know, I say it's simultaneously trying to be edgy and highbrow at the same time. I say that like to endearingly poke fun at this series, because I truly did really enjoy this series, but it does feel like it's one of those like teenagers that's trying to be edgy but also like I'm smarter and better than everyone else. So in this book, we're following our main character, Mia Corvair. So as a child, her whole family was slaughtered, and so she grew up and when she becomes of a certain age, she decides that she's going to enroll herself in the Red Church, which is basically this school for assassins, so that she can then have access to the resources to figure out who killed her family and then get revenge on them. There's a really cool shadow magic in this book that I really enjoyed, but when I say it's like trying to be highbrow, that's because of the writing style. It's gorgeous, don't get me wrong, this writing style is absolutely gorgeous, super lyrical. Then there's like really interesting stylistic choices where we have footnotes, which this was my first time ever coming into like contact with a book that like was like a novel, a fiction novel that had footnotes, and I loved it. And then the way that the writing style is, like I said, it's super lyrical, but it's almost like Victorian-esque writing, not quite, but yeah, so there's that. And then the edgy part is it is super dark, super brutal. Our main character is like stab first, ask questions later. And then the shadow magic and everything behind like this world is super like dark and sinister and creepy. And I really liked it. But yeah, I think this is like one of those books that like you could say it's like trying to be highbrow fantasy in terms of the writing style, but like edgy in terms of like the magic and the characters. So for number 12, I have a book that feels like it's all fun and games whimsy until suddenly it's 1 a.m. and you're sobbing. And that is Pure Nessie by Susanna Clarke. This is a super short novel. But we're following our main character, Pure Nessie, and he lives in this labyrinth of statues, and he's got like an ocean in this labyrinth, and he's got clouds in this labyrinth, and he's just wandering the halls completely by himself. There's nobody else that lives in this place, and he's just wandering the halls until one day he does find somebody in this labyrinth, and that's all I'm going to tell you. But this book, it's definitely very whimsical, but it takes a very dark turn, and then the end, it just like hurt. It like broke my heart. It was sad, but it felt like it wasn't necessarily meant to be just plain sad. There was like a very convoluted mix of emotions that it evoked, but it just ended up being heartbreaking and sad, and you just wanted to hug characters. And what's interesting, so it's written in a series of journal entries, and the journal entries are titled like not like normal journal entries, because Pure Nessie doesn't have like necessarily like a date system, or like our date system. A journal entry is a list of things the other has given me. Entry for the 17th day of the 6th month in the year of the albatross came to the southwestern halls. And it's just like so whimsical in that sense, but yeah, it made me cry a lot when I finished it. And then lastly, our 13th book recommendation is a book for the Sally Rooney TikTok girlies. Now, that being said, I've never actually read a Sally Rooney book, but I feel like I understand the vibe of Sally Rooney's books based off of what they've been described to me as and how people talk about them. And I understand the vibe of the Sally Rooney girlies. I get it. I see it, I understand it, and I think that you guys would like Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, because Sally Rooney's books, from what I have gathered, are books that deal a lot with just character relationships. They're very character-driven, character-focused stories that just focus on the messy ups and downs of relationships. And in this book, we focus a lot on the messy ups and downs of familial relationships. But basically, we start right away in this book, and the daughter of this family, Lydia, is found dead in this lake. And you don't know the circumstances behind the death. Like, was she killed by somebody else? Did she kill herself? Was it an accident? What happened? You don't know. But that happens. And then we're following are the rest of the family, the mom and the dad, and the siblings as they're dealing with their grief, but then we're also following the family as it's like formed. So we're following the husband and wife as they meet each other, and then kind of as they start to date, get married, have kids, things like that. And it's just a very beautiful and sad and just emotional depiction of this family and kind of like how they come together and come apart through like life, and also through the death of one of the family members. And I just think people who read Sally Rooney would like Celestine. So those are my oddly specific book recommendations that none of you asked for because I came up with them on my own. But hopefully you got a book recommendation out of there that you're like, oh yeah, this is something that I was looking for. I didn't realize I was looking for it until you mentioned it. So thanks for coming up with that, Sarah. You're welcome. You're welcome. If you actually have any oddly specific book recommendation prompts that you or like that you're wanting, let me know down in the comments and I'll try to come up with a recommendation for you. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing if you haven't already. But as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!